some red. Chunkier. Okay. So, you know how I was talking about the line of action? So the line of action, you know, it's this kind of S curve we're seeing. Sometimes it's a C curve, sometimes it's like a kind of broken curve, you know, sometimes there's a little more of that quality to it. It's rarely straight. We don't typically see any kind of like straight up and down poses with people. I mean, maybe if they're stiff, but there's gonna be often some slight favoring of the weight on one side or the other. It's more likely to have even a subtle slight amount of like lean towards one side or another. So you want to kind of be like mindful of that. You want to really kind of look at your pose and see, is there an emphasis on the weight being on one side of the figure or the other, or is it truly straight? Because if it's truly straight, you want to think about it more in a diagrammic sort of way, because when you have a line of action, that's really informing like everything about the pose. Like we have a lean here and we have a lean here, so we have maybe a shoulder, we have maybe a hip, so we're kind of getting this like kind of a stretching of these points happening, you know, on either side of the figure, where these curves are kind of pushing out the most, you know, versus with something that's like more straight up and down. Yeah, there's a very clear line of action there. But then with something that's more straight up and down, you know, if they're very straight, then you're going to want to think about how the kind of structure of the body really sits in that sense. So if like this is a straight pose, we're thinking more about, you know, how the neck flows into the hips. The neck's always going to flow into the hips, but like that's not necessarily what we predominantly think when we're really seeing a pushed pose. We're thinking about, you know, again, where are those curves really sticking out? Where are we seeing the stretching and the pulling happening in the figure versus a straight pose? You know, we're not going to see stretching and pulling, but we're still going to see like the hallmarks of how the muscles wrap into one another. So we're going to see it again from a more like diagrammic kind of point of view, but we still have rhythm to it. So we still see things like the arms and legs having a rhythm to them, you know, having that kind of interflowing quality to them. But we're going to see that, again, that relationship between the neck and the hips, because this is always going to happen. From any angle that you see, from the side too, you're going to see like the neck, like, you know, it's going to have a connection to the hips. We're always going to see it have a connection to the hips and how they flow. There's always going to be that quality of it. Yeah, let's bring these hips back so it's like stacked more properly. You know, we're gonna see this happening from every angle because the hips and the neck need to be connected in some kind of capacity for the character, for the figure to like have solid construction, because the point of like humans is to move around. So since the point of humans is to move around, the construction needs to be favoring that movement, but it also needs to be favoring the stabilization of the head. Really, the stabilization of the head is kind of one of the most important key details of any sort of like figure drawing, character drawing, realistic human drawing, because the body is always going to orient itself to support the head, so that way the head doesn't, you know, fall over, because our heads are as heavy as like a bowling ball. So because of this, you know, because our heads are as heavy as a bowling ball, you know, we need to kind of think of ourselves as like a tripod, essentially. You know, we're a little sort of tripod that keeps our head from like falling over, because it's got our precious little brain. Think of what I just drew here. You know, we can see this connection between the neck and the hips, then connecting to the inside of the ankle. So this gives us this little like kind of triangle. So just like I said, this tripod, so we can see how the head is now stabilized between the legs. So with the arms, you know, we still have a flow. With the legs, we still have a flow, you know, starting from in here, coming to out here, in to out. Most of the time I do have my gestures kind of flow like that, in to out, unless like the shoulder is like pushing out in some way, like with the arm. So if like I have an arm pose where like I have, you know, the shoulder pushing out, and then there's the elbow and it's like wrapping in, I'm going to think of this gesture line coming out here, wrapping behind that point of the elbow, and then coming up to wherever like the index finger is, or, you know, the operative finger. If he's flipping somebody off, then the middle finger will be the operative finger. If he's doing a pinky promise, the pinky will be the operative finger. If the hand is like leaning on something, it's going to favor the palm, the connection point between the ground. So things like that. But I think I started mentioning this because I was trying to say that the line of action is a rhythm. So, you know, and a rhythm is like, again, this like, it's like I'm pushing out this way and I'm pulling and pushing out, you know, these parentheses, these whoosh, 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 whoosh. This creates movement, you know, this guides your eye. So your eye is like caught here and then pushed here, and then caught here and pushed here, and caught here and pushed here. Just like a person on the trapeze, you know, just like a Cirque du Soleil, you know, freaking trapeze artist going and jumping and catching and jumping and catching. You know, these little kind of negative space points are where the eye jumps, but then we're caught here in this like other parentheses. And so that's the dance that happens, you know, when we're using rhythms in our work. So that's what we're connecting to when we're looking at this kind of art too. So thinking about rhythm as this like kind of like dancing sort of motion of this is pushing out and this is pushing out and this is pushing out and this is pushing out. You know, it really helps us to create a flow to our drawings that makes them very captivating to look at. And that's like the whole point, is that we want to look at a figure, feel what they're feeling, and then draw it, and then have that drawing reflect the feeling of the movement, the feeling of the energy of that figure. So that way when we look at it, we feel like we're moving, you know, we feel like we're experiencing that as well. When somebody else looks at it, they feel like they're experiencing that. So yeah, that old chestnut.